Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining the Maryland Chamber Foundation. We are very excited today to be joined by Stephen McAllister, the Executive Director of the Eastern Region for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Stephen is going to give us a great update from the U.S. Chamber on PPP as well as their path forward. We also have the Maryland Chamber of Commerce's Vice President of Government Affairs, Ashley Duckman. A few housekeeping notes. Everyone is currently muted and in listen-only mode. However, we do want this to be an interactive session. And if you'd like to ask a question of Stephen, you may certainly do so by clicking on the symbol you see on your screen and typing in your question to the live event Q&A section. If we are not able to get to your question today, please reach out to the Maryland Chamber directly at the email address on your screen. And of course, we will be recording today's webinar, and it will be added to the Maryland Chamber's COVID-19 resources page, as well as our YouTube channel, which is on your screen. Speaking of our COVID-19 resources page, we are regularly updating this daily sometimes. And so we're including information from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Governor Hogan's office, as well as the Maryland Department of Commerce and the Maryland Department of Labor. We're including information on the state and federal emergency loans and grants, and we're including all of our webinars on there as well. All right, so let's get started. I'd like to bring in Stephen McAllister from the U.S. Chamber to take it away. Stephen?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me this morning. Just wanted to touch on a number of different things, but I want this to be a conversation as well. First off, the joys of working at home. I am in one room here speaking to people in Maryland, and my wife is in another room in the house teaching first grade. So there's a lot going on at the McAllister household today, but we've done this for about a month now, a month and a half. It goes by fast, so it's almost getting into a routine. I wanted to touch on a couple of things here today. One of the first things I want to talk about is the legislation that was passed last night in the House of Representatives. The Senate passed it earlier. They're putting $310 billion additional funds into the Paycheck Protection Program and the Small Business Administrators. We're calling the EIDL loans, those economic disaster loans. The two big pieces of information I want to share with everybody is, first, if you were already in the queue for one of those two programs, you're still in the queue. So if you've gone through the process and then all of a sudden they ran out of money 2 weeks ago, you're still in there. So you're still in line to get it because both these programs are first come, first serve. If you haven't already applied for this, you want to apply as soon as possible. The issue that we are going to see, because there are so many people that have been applying for these, we believe that this money is going to go very quickly. And when we mean quickly, I mean in a matter of days, because there are so many pending applications. So if you are thinking about applying for these, please do it as soon as possible. The two quick caveats, and I'm happy to dive deep into these two programs later on if you would like some additional information. But the two big important things to keep in mind is the Paycheck Protection Program. You work with your local lender for that program. So you're going to go to your local bank and you're going to apply through them. The Department of Treasury has that application. You're going to apply through your local lender. If you have a pre-existing relationship with a bank, please go to them first. Because there is such a demand on this, we are hearing from our members across the country that if you didn't have a previous relationship with them, banks were turning you down just because they just didn't have the bandwidth to take on new people. There is no requirement that says you had to have a previous relationship to get a loan through a bank for the Paycheck Protection Program. But if you already have a relationship, it makes it a lot easier. For the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, you're going to work through the Small Business Administration for that program. That is the SBA. We're calling it the EIDL loan. It's the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. That is more of a traditional loan, whereas the Paycheck Protection Program, the goal is to turn that money into a grant. that you apply for a loan, you get funding. The funding is starting to come. I'm hearing more and more every day from businesses across the Eastern region that this money has appeared in their accounts some yesterday, some earlier in the week. So the money is coming from that. If you do it correctly, that loan can turn into a grant. The economic injury disaster loan, which you're going to work through the Small Business Administration, that is more of a traditional loan, and that is taking a while to get the money to you. So you want to factor that in. This program has been around for 60 years. It's usually set up for after a disaster, so a hurricane, something like that, when you're trying to rebuild. So they was never set up to get the money out quickly, and they have not been able to get the money out quickly. So the Paycheck Protection Program, you work through your local lender. You want that to turn into a grant. There's a formula. We have all this information that I will share with you after this materials. The economic injury disaster loan is more of a traditional loan. There is a one little piece of that, which can be a grant. It's up to $10,000, and you can apply for an emergency grant to help maintaining your payroll. It's the equivalent of $1,000 per employees that you have. So if you have 5 employees, the maximum grant you can receive in that program is $5,000. So as of last night, the president, he signed this law, putting an additional $310 billion into these programs. Now they'll start the process again as soon as the banks can get up and running. So we're hoping that will be later this afternoon. So look for that. But again, if you were already in the queue, you're good to go because you're still in line for that. If you have not applied, please apply as soon as possible. And unfortunately, we are very concerned that the funding for this is going to dry up again in only a couple of days because there is such a demand for this. So that's kind of a snapshot of what we're looking at right now. The next thing in Congress they're going to be working on is what we're calling phase 4 of the CARES Act. So they're doing it in phase. We're saying that what was just passed last night was kind of a 3.5 because there was no changes to eligibility. There was no additions other than funding for this. They didn't change any eligibility. So if you're a C6 and if you're wondering if you're eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program, unfortunately, you are still not eligible for that. We are working at the U.S. Chamber to get C6s and all nonprofits included in eligibility for the Paycheck Protection Program, and we're working towards getting that included into phase 4. Now, what will be in phase 4, that's anybody's guess. The goal that we are hearing from the Speaker of the House is she wants the majority of it to help the small business community, but also to aid state and local governments. So we are looking at that. I've already heard members of Congress. I've been on a call with a member of Congress, and he's already talking about phase 5, what he wants to see in phase 5, transportation, infrastructure type packages in phase 5. So we got to get to phase 4 before we can get to phase 5. But that'll be the next kind of big push that you'll start hearing. Everything needs to be done with unanimous consent, or they have to come back into session. So the House and Senate aren't scheduled to come back until I think the second week in May. However, the House was unable to pass this bill last night with unanimous consent, so they had to have a quorum. So members of Congress did have to travel back to Washington, D.C. to vote on this. Because people are not there, you have to pass things by unanimous consent, or you have to bring people back. It's very difficult to get anything done. Almost 2 weeks ago, these 2 funds ran out of money, and we had met a member of Congress that didn't want to replenish that, but it still took them 2 weeks to get those funds going again. So as you know, Congress kind of takes their time, and this is additional issue that you have to deal with, whereas some members of Congress do not want to travel to Washington, D.C. yet. Technically, they're not in session at this time. The House had to come back because of that last night. So next steps, what we are working on at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is coming up is what is it going to look like when we return to work? Everybody is starting to think this way now. In certain parts of the country, they are lifting the stay-at-home orders. In Georgia today, they are lifting a number of restrictions. They are now allowing bowling alleys to open up, movie theaters to open up, the hairdressers, gyms. So there's a lot of eyes are going to be on that area right now, because even the federal government doesn't believe that they should be opening up at this time, but the governor has decided to do that. So we're kind of keeping an eye on that. What we want to focus on at the U.S. Chambers is almost what your workplace is going to look like. Now, I have to stress, and this is why I want to turn this into a conversation, there is no playbook for this. So we do not at the U.S. Chamber have all the answers. We don't even know all the questions yet. So that's one of the things I'm going to ask for is what should we be looking at? What are you hearing? What are your concerns? Because we don't exactly know what your workplace is going to look like once we return to work. We're saying once we get that yellow light, we want to be able to hit the ground running. And we say yellow light because we're not going to get a green light. It's not like we can just turn on the economy and everyone just goes back to normal. There is going to be so many factors and so many concerns that we're going to need to deal with when returning, when we get that yellow light. We believe it's going to be gradual. We believe it's going to be phased in. There will be different factors we need to be looking at, the location of the business, the sector of the business, the type or the size of the business, and of course, the health workers. So what we are trying to do at the U.S. Chamber is kind of explore and categorize some of the major implications of returning to work in this environment. So we broke it down here, and you can see on that slide kind of essential services and resources, a resolution of regulatory and legal liability issues, and support for businesses and individuals. So these things are going to be ranging from workplace safety and employee rights to liability concerns and continue revenue disruptions. There's going to be a lot of businesses that aren't going to be able to be at full speed once they do get back, and we're going to talk about that. So if we could go to the next slide, please. All right, thank you. So the kind of first step that we're looking at in those three things that we were talking about is essential services and resources. So again, what we're putting out ideas right now, things that we need to think about. But please, later on, let me know what else should we include in this? What else are we looking at? We don't know the questions we don't know the answers to questions we don't know yet. So we want to work together on that. So I think the first thing we really need to look at when you're reopening your business is general health screenings. As you know, the CDC has recommended that critical infrastructure employees screen certain exposed employees for temperature before they even enter the facility. So our first question is, who's going to be in charge of that? They want to talk about increasing testing for COVID-19 to return to work. So our question is, well, who's responsible for that? Is it the employer? Is it the employees? Is it going to be a third party? Is it the government? Who's going to be responsible for administrating these tests? Who's going to be responsible for paying for these tests? And who's going to be responsible for checking the tests? So checking the results of these tests. You know your business better than me. Most employers are not going to be well positioned to administrate these medical tests, so they may need to be third-party providers. Now, how many of these third-party providers are going to be available? If you want to start, if say May 1st, we get the yellow light to go forward, it's not just your business, it's going to be all the businesses in the state. So, who's going to be available to administer these tests? Is it going to be on the employer to pay for the tests? And is it on the employer to check the test results? So these things that we are definitely going to need some clear guidance from the government. the federal government and the state government, and we want it to be universal. That's going to be a big thing that we're going to keep talking about. We want to make sure that the plans that we are doing are universal. It shouldn't be in one city it's one requirement, another city it's another requirement, because that is not conducive to business. Same thing, your workplace is going to look different when you return. The social distancing is going to continue. Requiring personal protective equipment like a mask or a cover up for your face is going to be required. We are already starting to see states coming up with their own regulations on this, and it is putting the burden on the employer. In the state of Connecticut, so I work for the U.S. Chamber of the Eastern Region. I cover 11 states, including Maryland. One of the states that I cover is Connecticut. In Connecticut yesterday, they came out with regulations that says the employer is responsible for providing their employees a mask when they come into work, or a cover, something to cover your face. It doesn't have to be an actual mask. It can be a bandana or something just to cover the nose and the mouth. But if the employer does not have that, they need to provide the employees a video of how to make your own masks. They have to provide that, or they can be held liable. One of the other things that the Connecticut is looking at is, say I'm in my office and you're in your office. Do I have to wear the mask the whole time? They're saying yes. They're saying that you have to do that as soon as someone else comes into your area. They are saying that you need to eliminate common work area spaces. So we're going to have to see how this is going to be enforced. The last thing we want to see is the government coming into your business and with a measuring stick and saying, okay, you're only 5.5 feet away. We're going to fine you. This one is 6 feet. You're okay. So all these things we really need to look at, because we need to know who's going to be held liable if people are not wearing their masks, if they're not provided a mask. All these things we need to review. Transportation is also key to getting the economy back going. Millions of Americans rely on public transportation to get to and from work each day. The issue with public transportation is you are riding with a number of people that you don't know. And so how are we going to do that if you have to keep social distance as part of reopening the economy? One way we need to look at is staggering work times, so we could spread out rush hour. So transit systems will likely need to operate at more than normally being assessed their capability in the public health concerns, meaning we may have to run these buses, these trains longer, because if we have to stagger these work shifts, not everybody will be going in at the same time. Not everybody's going in at 8:30, 9, 7:30, 8. You stagger that out. So not everybody's leaving work at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock for that traditional rush hour. But again, how do you coordinate that? How can my business might need to start at 7:30 in the morning, and your business may also need to start at 7:30 in the morning. So how do you coordinate? How is the government going to do this? Requiring staggered work times. We don't know how that's going to look. Childcare. Childcare is also critical. If we're going to reopen the economy, parents need to have a place to take their children so they can return to work. So we're really going to need to look at this. In order for other parents to return to work, childcare providers will need to be open. They got to be able to get their employees to come back to work. What is that going to look like? Another side note that I want to mention is you may start hearing, with the unemployment from the state provides, and then the additional $600 that the federal government is providing, a lot of people are making close to the same amount of money that on an unemployment than they were making while they were working. So we are already hearing of some businesses, some of our member businesses who got the Paycheck Protection Program money, which required them to bring back people, that their employees do not want to return because they're making more money or are close to the same amount of money while staying at home on unemployment. What we are telling our members when this happens is, in the law, that additional $600, the unemployed person is only eligible for that until you call them back into work. So if you call them back into work, technically they are no longer eligible for that additional $600 from the federal government. So you will have to work with your state unemployment office, let them know that you have asked for these people to return. So technically, then the government should stop that additional $600 coming from the federal government. But we're already hearing that is an issue. We hope that you're not running into that, but I do want to flag that because we are hearing that more and more as we move forward, trying to get the economy back going. Now, if we go to the next slide, please. Here is something that we really have a lot of concerns with at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I think you, as business leaders, you're going to have a lot of these same concerns as well. And that is what are the resolution of regulatory and legal liability issues. We at the U.S. Chamber are already tracking COVID-related lawsuits, and they are numerous. There is a lot of individuals, there are a lot of companies that are being sued at this time because they're saying, I had to go to work and I contracted COVID, so I'm now suing my employer. Now, it's very difficult unless you're at working in a hospital and you're exposed to it all the time. It's very difficult to prove where you contracted COVID. So this is something that is putting the employers really in a defensive position because there are an outstanding number of lawsuits already happening. And we believe that once the yellow light comes and more people return to the workplace, there are going to be a ton of legal and liability issues that need to be worked out. Now, these are just some of them: health, privacy, discrimination, safe workplace requirements that we really need to look at. I'm just going to touch on a few of them and give a few examples of what we are already hearing on health privacy. Now, we already talked about earlier on, maybe there's going to be requirements that they're going to have to take your temperature before you return into work. Maybe you're going to have to take a COVID-19 test before you can return to work. Well, there's privacy issues. There's health privacy issues that are already in effect. How is that going to work with requiring these health things before you can return to work? So federal and some state laws are designed to maximize the health privacy of individuals. However, this objective could come in conflict with the potential reopening requirements for employers to verify an employee's COVID-19 status and or their vulnerability due to underlying health conditions. You can't exactly ask people, do they have these underlying health conditions? So it's going to be very difficult for an employer to administer these tests and ask the correct questions, and they could be sued because of this. So we really are looking that we need to be some resolution on these regulatory issues before going forward. So this is definitely something that we are working on. Discrimination claims. I'll use an example from my home state of Rhode Island. Earlier this week, Governor Raimondo from Rhode Island, she said that she is hopeful that when her current executive order expires for the stay at home, I believe it's May 8th, that we will be able to get that yellow light and start returning to work. But she said, however, there may be some additional restrictions if you're over 60 years old. Well, people went crazy over that. Because how can you discriminate against somebody by their age? What do you mean that if I'm 59, I can return back to work and make a living for my family, but if I'm 60, I can't return when everybody else is returning? So she's already had to walk that back. And that was just a statement, but that just shows that all these issues are going to come up. You cannot discriminate against your employees based on these factors like age. So it is going to be very difficult to kind of balance this act when you were having your employees return to the workplace because of these issues that are outstanding. We don't exactly know what it's going to look like and how we're going to enforce these things because there's all these legal issues. Again, who is going to be responsible for these tests, for these safe workplace requirements? I keep harping on that because that's going to be probably one of the first things that we need to figure out when people are returning back en masse. Who is responsible for administering the test? Who's responsible for paying the test? And who is checking those results? These are things that we really need to figure out because more liability issues are going to come. You need to provide a safe workplace for your employees. That includes these tests. Again, where is the responsibility going towards that? Now, there's a lot of employment practices. Independent contractors are also going to have some issues. So these are all things we're kind of flagging right now to look at. Again, exposure, liability exposure is a big thing. It could be one of the largest concerns for businesses, for the business community, because there could be multiple types of claims that are brought against a business that has been designated as essential, as well as large amounts of the community once it's reopened. So once it's reopened, it's everybody essential. So what happens with the liability with that? So again, these are the legal issues that we just want to flag that we don't have the answers for right now. These are just things that we're talking about. We're saying these are things that are coming up that we are going to have to face. Medical liability, who's going to be responsible for that? You know, you see things that are happening at the nursing homes, assisted living homes. Are they going to be sued for failing to protect their residents and their patients? We don't know yet. We don't know what that's going to look at. Who's going to be responsible for this? But there is going to be a lot of litigation that is going to be coming out, and a lot of that is going to fall on the employers that are going to have to play a lot of defense at this time. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so again, so we want to support for businesses and individuals. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when we get this yellow light, it's going to depend on where your location is, whether you can reopen, what sector you're in, what type of business you have. We have concerns because there's a huge part of the economy that is just not going to be able to return there. They're going to almost have to come back and work at a loss. Entertainment venues, larger restaurants, larger bars, companies that host meetings and events. You know, many other businesses are only profitable when they have a large occupancy, a number of people coming to their businesses. So there's a lot of businesses that rely on trade shows, a lot of businesses that rely on personal travel. All these things are going to look different with social distancing. So a gradual or a phased-in reopening that restricts the size of gatherings or limits travel may technically permit these businesses to reopen, but what that mean opening at a significant loss? So if you own a concert hall that can usually have 10,000 people, but you can only include a fraction of that because of social distancing and restrictions on how many people you can have at a certain venue, you may not be able to reopen. It may not work for you. So we're going to have to look to see if there is some additional help that the government can do for those types of businesses. Again, there are also high-risk populations that will need to engage in social distancing or even remain home entirely. Individuals, including independent contractors, who stay home because of the risk, their profile will need ongoing financial support if they cannot work remotely. This way may require an extension of the regular unemployment insurance, or we're even talking about maybe a creation of a new high-risk unemployment insurance system. Again, there are certain businesses, they're just not, their business model is not going to fit what has happened with this crisis, with the social distancing, with the lack of travel, with the lack of being able to have large groups. They may have to really target those particular businesses and try to come up with a new unemployment system to keep them afloat. If we can go to the next slide, please. Now, again, this is the part where we want to hear from you. We have a number of questions that we are asking. We're asking our members. We're asking members of Congress. We're asking governors when they were talking about how we're going to reopen this. So here's just a few. I know this is a busy slide, but this is just some of the questions that, and then I want to stop and talk to you. What are we forgetting to ask? So, what additional essential services do you see as necessary to support a phased reopening? What resources do you anticipate needing to operate, again, a phased-in reopening? What additional guidance, including specific regulatory guidance from the federal government, would benefit from a phased-in reopening? Again, I just gave you a number of things on the regulatory and the legal side, but I didn't give you how to fix it yet. We don't know how to fix it yet, but we're just talking about some of the things that we're anticipating. Do you anticipate your business needing additional financial support to bridge a phased-in reopening? If so, what should that form look like? Have you benefited from any federal support, including the SBA Paycheck Protection Program implemented since the onset of the pandemic? So I'm starting to hear, in our region at least, businesses are starting to receive that funding. Now they have to keep their workers on for the next 8 weeks, so that and paying their salaries so that money can turn into a grant. Is that going to be able to keep you afloat? One of the things that the U.S. Chamber has done is we have partnered with MetLife, and we conducted a poll of our members. And unfortunately, 1 in 4 small businesses claim that they are on the brink of permanent closure. So people are really excited to get back to work, to get their businesses open, because they were really, really hurting. But there are so many questions out there. There are so many things that we don't even know what to look for. So this is just a quick snapshot of some of the things that we are looking at the U.S. Chamber. I want to stop here, take a breath, take some questions, but please, what do we need to know? What questions aren't we asking? What are you anticipating when you return for your particular sector? These are the things that I think needs to be the next step as we look to re-enter into the economy.
Thank you, Stephen. For the benefit of our attendees, this is Ashley Duckman, our VP of Government Affairs here at the Chamber of Commerce, and just want to thank you and all of your colleagues at the U.S. Chamber for your continued collaboration and for sharing this great information with our audience. I'm going to give you a little bit of a break and just talk briefly about, in response to a few of your points about reopening and the things that we're doing at the Chamber, specifically Maryland. But wanted to remind our attendees that if you do have specific questions for any part of Stephen's presentation, please submit them in the chat feature. We have gotten a number come through and we'll get to them. I did just want to say, specific to Maryland, many of you may have seen that today at 3 p.m. our governor is going to unveil his roadmap to recovery, which is being called Maryland Strong. And he spent a number of weeks talking about 4 pillars that would be contained within that plan. Most of them, all of them, are public health and safety focused. They are wider access to testing, more widespread testing, access to PPE, an increase in hospital surge capacity, and then a robust contract tracing network. And over the course of the last week plus, our governor, Larry Hogan, has talked through how our state is tackling each of those 4 pillars. And so we anticipate that that will be the foundation of what he unveils today, and perhaps a beginning of a framework for what a phased-in reopening for different sectors of our economy would look like. So that will happen today at 3 p.m. At the Chamber, we have had an ongoing COVID-19 working group where we're engaging our members from across almost all sectors, businesses, small to large, to think about what does that look like, what does a phased-in reopening look like for Maryland. And we have a number of efforts underway. One is working toward what we would characterize sort of as a safe workplace guidelines or best practices document that could be leveraged by employers as we think of what a phased-in reopening is going to look like. So that is ongoing, and you can anticipate that that will come out within the next week. We're also working on a vision and plan for a number of policy proposals that would assist to what Stephen was talking about with respect to additional support, be it financial, regulatory, liability protection, et cetera, for business as we move into sort of the next phase of addressing this pandemic. So 2 different initiatives underway through that working group here at the Chamber that you can expect to see from us in the coming weeks. And as Whitney mentioned at the beginning of our webinar, our resources are always readily available in real time on our website. So why don't we get to the questions? I just wanted to ask one, Stephen, point of privilege from being the moderator. The bill that passed and was signed into law yesterday, we understand that there was $11 billion set aside for states and localities, and that money includes the ability to cover the cost of testing for employers. Are you aware of that? And if so, do you have any additional information on it?
I don't have additional information on it. I know there is a carve out for that. Our big focus was on the Paycheck protection and the economic injury disaster loan. So that was kind of my focus when I was looking through that. But there is a carve out for the states on the testing thing. I'm sure we can get you some information on that. No problem.
Okay, great. And turning to questions from our participants, we have one here. There's sort of obviously 2 categories, a lot specific to the PPP and then the rest on reopening. So we'll tackle the PPP first. This one asks, we are hearing rumors that PPP forgiveness is going to be tied to being able to demonstrate drops in cash flow. Is there any truth to that?
Yes, the way it was set up and what they are looking at is 75% of the loan that you receive needs to go towards your payroll costs, keeping people on the payroll. You can only use 25% of the remainder. So the 75% needs to go towards payroll costs exclusively. Then the final remaining 25%, that can go towards your mortgage payments, your lease payments, and your utility payments. But to get the full, the borrower to get the full thing forgiveness, 75% of that loan needs to go towards maintaining your payroll.
Terrific. Thank you for that answer. The next question we have relative to that is, our employees' wages fluctuate from week to week. They are currently not working because this business is closed for the foreseeable future, given that they are categorized as non-essential. How do we determine how much to pay them with PPP funds since their wages are not fixed each week during a normal time?
Yes, so there is a formula that they have, and it's the sum of what they're calling included payroll costs minus the sum of excluded payroll costs, and I can get you that, but it is the salary, the included payroll cost is salary, wage, commission, or any type of compensation, payment of any cash tip or equivalent, payment of vacation, parental, family, medical, or sick leave, any allowances that you provide for dismissal or separation, any payment of provisions of group healthcare benefits, including insurance premiums, payment of any retirement benefit, and payment of any state and local tax that are assessed just on the compensation of the employee. That's what is included in your payroll costs. What they're going to do is they're going to look at a previous quarter to kind of come up with the formula for you. So they're going to look at what did last year, 2019, during the same period that you're looking for the loan, what were you paying your employees? So that's kind of how they're going to use it. That's really the only guide with fluctuating salaries that they can do. They're going to look at a previous quarter. Now you may be able to get them to use the last quarter right before this crisis. They may go back a year. That's going to depend when you sit down with your local lenders how they're going to come up with that included payroll cost.
Thanks, Stephen. And a question regarding your comment about the unemployment benefits being provided by the federal government, that $600 a week. So regarding that comment about calling an employee back to work and their ineligibility for the extra federal $600 a week of unemployment, if you are a business that is closed, but you pay your employees under the PPP while they're not working, does that also make them ineligible for the extra $600 a week?
Yes, according to the law, the $600, the individual is allowed to collect the additional $600 as long as they're out of work. But once you call them back, they lose that eligibility for the $600. So it's once you ask them to come back to work, then they are no longer eligible for that $600. So if you factor their salary in for the Paycheck Protection Program and you receive that money for their paycheck, you need them to come back because that was part of the formula that you use to receive the money. If you do not bring them back and you're not paying them, but you use their salary in your equation for the Paycheck Protection Program loan, you're not going to get the full thing forgiven because you need to keep people. If you use them, if you say, we're going to rehire Steve McAllister, and so when you're applying for the Paycheck Protection Program, you put Steve McAllister's salary into the equation. They give you the money for Steve McAllister's salary. If you actually don't bring back Steve McAllister's salary and use that money for something else, you're going to be on the hook for repaying a portion of that loan. Whereas if you brought me back, that money that you were spending on my salary can become forgivable. So you want to be careful with that, with what you're including when you apply for these paycheck protection programs, because the goal is to make it forgivable, but you need to bring these people back. If you do not include them when you apply for the Paycheck Protection Program and you do not bring them back, you don't have to worry about it. But if you say that you're paying them, that you need this loan, you need X amount from the Paycheck Protection because you're paying for, again, the example, Steve McAllister's salary, but then Steve McAllister doesn't come back, or after 2 weeks, your business is still struggling, you have to lay Steve McAllister off again. Unfortunately, you're going to be on the hook for a portion of that loan that is not going to be forgivable, because one of the requirements is you need to keep that individual on for 8 weeks. During the 8 weeks that you can get to make that loan forgivable, you need to keep that employee on the payroll the entire time. So if you include their salary and they do not come back, that's why you need to contact your local unemployment office to let them know they are no longer eligible for that $600, because you are the one that could get on the hook for taking on additional debt because they didn't come back, if you included their salary when you originally applied for the Paycheck Protection Program.
That's really helpful. I think sort of along those lines, we have a business owner asking if we are able to secure a PPP loan and we do bring back and pay employees, but after a few months when the funds run out, the business is still not at the level where it was before and they are forced to lay off employees again. What are the consequences for that?
So the most that you can apply for a Paycheck Protection loan, again, to turn into a grant, is 2.5 times the borrower's average monthly payroll costs. So you need to keep those workers on when you figure out this equation. Now, we have a great document that I'm going to send after this that we can share with everybody. That it's called the Small Business Guide to the Paycheck Protection Program. This document has been shared over 1.5 million times across the world. People like Mark Cuban have been sharing it. Senator Marco Rubio, who actually was one of the authors of the CARES Act, uses it and gives that to his constituents to break it down. So I'm going to send this so you can look at that as well. And you're only going to get reimbursed for an 8-week period. So that's what the loan is going to come from for the next 8. Once you get the money, it's for 8 weeks that you need to keep those employees on. After that, you're not getting any additional funds for the paycheck. So after, say, 3 months, that loan was already being forgivable, so you wouldn't have to do it. But that's the only requirement, is for the 8 weeks. Once you receive that, you're using that money to pay for your employees' salaries. That becomes forgivable. But you had mentioned what happens in 3 months or 4 months down the road. You're only eligible to get 8 weeks worth of forgiveness.
Great, thank you.
And I know that's a lot. I know that's a lot, but this document is really good and it's really straightforward. But again, it's a formula, and I can't stress it enough. You want to sit with your local lender while you're applying for this, because you want to make sure everything lines up so this loan becomes forgiven. Because if you get tripped up on a couple of things, you have to lay people off 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in. Unfortunately, you're going to take on additional debt at the worst possible time, and we don't want to see that.
Great, thanks, Stephen. And I know we have a hard stop here in a couple of minutes, so why don't we turn our attention to some of the questions that we're getting more along the lines of reopening and a phased-in reopening, and what that might look like. And one thing that you talked about was the yellow light timing of when we would be able to start thinking about reopening. And there is sort of this idea that there are in order to do that, for that time to start, there is this 14-day time frame out there on various declining metrics. And this is a question we actually have gotten a lot at the chamber. Is that 14 days, and is that consecutive, a running average? Is it defined anywhere? Are you hearing anything about what that 14 days really means?
I have not. I've just like you guys, we are hearing at the chamber all different things that are included in that 14 days, consecutive days, dropping, different things like that. So that's one of the things that we're really harping on, is we want to have a standardized, so everybody's on the same level, that we all know what we're looking at. I kind of smiled when you were going over what Governor Hogan's 4-point pillars, because I've heard 6 points in Rhode Island that they're indicating. Connecticut, they had 5 points. I think New York has 8-point pillars. So it's like, everyone's they're all talking the same issue, but we're all using different language. And that's one of the things that we're concerned of. So we're keeping an eye on that. We really want to have standardized requirements, so everybody's playing on the same level field.
Thank you. And you spent some time in your path forward talking about the potential legal liability and regulatory issues. And can you speak specifically to independent contractors? We have someone here who would like to know if you have anything specific on what the impact will be to independent contractors of those issues.
Sure. So, we're looking to support for independent contractors. I mean, more than 23 million Americans receive income as an independent contractors in fields as varied as construction, news reporting, professional services, online platform work. Businesses want to be able to provide the same type of workplace protections to independent contractors that they do employees. However, doing so could be used to argue that the individual has ceased to be an independent contractor and is instead an employee. So this is the legal part that we're concerned about. Congress should settle this tension by creating a safe harbor that will allow businesses to implement health practices and provide benefits, including mask, PPE, as we're calling it, personal protection equipment, without establishing a formal employment relationship for the duration of the COVID-19 return to work transition. So that's the one part that we're really looking at for the independent contractors, is we want to make sure that they're protected as well. But the employer needs to know, we need to know, are they now an employee? If you're an independent contractor, you're going in to work on someone's server or construction. Are you now an employee of that company? That needs to be clarified. So that's kind of what we're harping on, we're looking at right now for the independent contractors on the legal side.
Perfect. I think with that, we will close it out. Again, want to thank Stephen McAllister and the U.S. Chamber for your just unwavering partnership and the constant flow of information that we've been getting, which has been tremendous. There were a couple of very specific questions on PPE that came through, and we will provide the resources that Stephen mentioned to you all. And if there are things that can be answered that are more specific that we can help you with at the chamber, please email the address that Whitney provided at the beginning of our webinar, and we'll do our best to track that down for you. But again, Stephen, thank you. We appreciate it. And everyone, please stay safe and be well.
Thank you so much. Best
you.
of luck, everybody. Thank you.